The first dimension of color was hue. The second dimension of color was value. And the third and final dimension of color is intensity. Intensity is the strength or saturation of a color. And the difference between intensity and value is that it's not done by using the principle of adding white or black to a color, but rather using another color like a complementary hue to enhance or dull its intensity. This is far easier shown than explained, so let me demonstrate what I mean through some simple vector examples. So now we're going to take a look at the intensity of a color. And in this case, you see these swatches in front of you now. The top row of these swatches are colors that are high intensity. And the exact same colors are below it, but those colors are low intensity versions of the same hue. And this is easily done by, if we take this red and you can darken that hue as we saw in a previous movie by going in here. And yes, you can add black to it to darken a hue, but in this case, we want to remove some of the intensity, some of that pigment. So right now, you can see that it's 100 magenta, 100 in yellow. So if we kick that back, let's say we'll go to 85 here, and on the yellow, we'll go to 85. We're lowering the intensity. The intensity of that hue is being diminished. In the same case, we're going to bring up just about, we'll go, let's say, to 10 black. And so you can see that now that color is now muted. It's more diminished in terms of its intensity. And that's all we're talking about here, regardless of what color you're using. Instead of a bright, intense illustration, you want to knock back the intensity on color. And a lot of this will have to do with the context. So let's look at an illustration in context. And we have Farmer Zeke here. And Farmer Zeke has his property with his farm, and you can see the mountains in the background. Now, this is a very simplified illustration. It's childlike in essence. And this is why within the context of a lot of children's books, you see very intense colors. Kids respond to intense colors. That's why there's a lot of bright, vibrant colors used within a children's book illustration. And this could be used for a children's book illustration. So we're going to clone Zeke and bring in his clone back here. And now we're going to take this exact same illustration, and I'm going to show you how it changes not only the mood of the illustration, it actually helps to work in depth to the illustration. And all we're doing here is we've just changed the intensity of the colors in this scene. So this is how the scene looks now, but when we turn on the low intensity version of the background, this is what you get. And it's a pretty incredible difference in terms of if I toggle back and forth. So high intensity, low intensity. Not only did we intensify the background and the scenery of this illustration, we also lowered the intensity on his clone because he's further away from the viewer. So he's going to be less intense than Zeke, who's in the foreground. And that's the principle you want to think of when you're using intensity within an illustration, is that those things closer to the viewer are going to be more intense, more vibrant in color. Those things further away, such as this background on this mountain here, are going to be more muted, more grayed back in color, and less intense. Less light is being shined on it, so you don't see the pigment. It's more gray because there's atmosphere between the viewer and the content. So that's how intensity works. It's a pretty simple concept, and even in an iconic illustration like this, it can help to take a piece of artwork, and just by changing the intensity, you change the feel of it, and therefore it can go from a childlike illustration to something that looks a little more sophisticated. The dimensions of color aren't independent from one another, and I think this is really important to remember. They all work together. So when you adjust colors, it's always going to affect the hue, value, intensity of the color you're working on. So creating good color solutions is most often discovered through trial and error. So take the time to experiment, and you'll develop new opportunities for your illustrative projects.